love you.
Hello, my name's Tom Walker. Welcome to That'll Be the Day. In this podcast, I'm talking to a former professional cricketer who played for Yorkshire and England. But before we hear from Geoff Cope, if you like the music at the start of this podcast, it's a track called That'll Be the Day by the Liverpool band The Vow. And if you like the sound of the music, as always, I'll be featuring a track by The Vow at the end of this podcast. To find out which one it is, stay tuned. As a cricketer, Geoff Cope shared dressing rooms with some giants of the game, and he's a pretty big name himself. But at the age of 37, Geoff was told he had the eye condition Retinitis Pigmentosa. Some years later, Geoff spoke to an ophthalmologist who plotted the course of how his eyesight would deteriorate. A couple of weeks ago, I spoke to Geoff on Zoom, and whether you're a cricket fan or not, I think you'll find his story completely fascinating. I started by asking Geoff how his eyesight is now.
Well, at the moment, it's not very good, I'm afraid. I have with me currently a guide dog, my third. But I go back to, I'm 76 years of age now, but when I was 37, I was diagnosed with, it was initially something completely different. I had sort of an enlarged retina, and then I went to see a specialist who confirmed that I had RP. His words were, "I'm sorry, you've got retinitis pigmentosa. Don't dash off to America or Australia who think they've a cure. They haven't." And he opened the door. And I said, "Excuse me." I said, "You've just swore at me." So he said, "I've never swore at a patient in my life." I said, Reti, what did you say?" So he said, "Do you want me to write it down?" I said, "Yes, please." He says, "Retinitis pigmentosa." So I says, "Well, what's that in basic English?" "Well, you're going blind." And I came away from there, as you can imagine, in a bit of shock. I rang my optician, who was a great guy. He was a consultant with Kelvin Lenses at the time, and he made contact with me and said, "Look, I look for things like this all the time. I saw nothing at all, but I'm coming to see you." And he came to see me, and he said, it's very, very, very mild. So I went on then to 42 when I had conjunctivitis. And one night I rang my doctor, and through the night he kept ringing me, and we kept bathing the eyes. And then he fixed me up to go see a gentleman called Bruce Noble, who happened to be 6'10", and worked at the local hospital, the Nuffield Hospital. And he said, if I can get there by 8, Bruce would fit me in and have a look at me. And we made a friendship there. And he asked me if I'd go through the tests and the routines again. And I said, "Do you not think it's there?" He said, "I'm not saying that." But he came out with, "It is there, sadly." But he said, "It's very, very mild. You've just got to get on with your life." And he then told me what he thought would happen throughout my life, even to the point of saying, when you reach 50, I think will be the time when you've to give up your car. And he plotted things through, and he's been a source of comfort ever since. And after he'd retired, we actually bumped into each other at a test match at Leeds last year, and we had a very good day. But I owe a lot to him.
Can we go back to the start of your cricketing career, Geoff? Cricket fans wouldn't forgive me if we didn't have a chat about cricket as well, because you played for Yorkshire and England, and you started playing for Yorkshire, I think I'm right in saying, at a fairly young age. Were you 19 or 20?
I was 19. I joined Yorkshire. I played in the second team in 64, and I made my debut in 1966. So I'd come through school ranks. I'd played with Yorkshire boys, England boys, and against people like Frank Hayes and David Lloyd and people of this ilk. And we've been against each other all our lives. But interestingly, they're good friends. And this is what the game presents to you.
Am I right in saying, Geoff, that while you were very young, I don't know, 14 or 15, you played in a game and took all 10 wickets of the opposition?
You're very right. You've obviously done your homework. I was very fortunate that I went to a junior school in Crossgates in Leeds, where I was born, called Manston. And we had a headmaster there called Ernest Smelt. And he was, I believe, a former Durham cricketer, but he played locally in the leagues. We also had a teacher called Ken Fletcher, and these two people had such an effect on my sporting career. It's just, you can't measure it. Mr. Smelt rolled up one day to ask if I could play on the Saturday. And my mum said, but I thought school had finished. He says, oh, yes, it's the holidays, but he's going to play with my men's team. She says, but he's only just 11. And she said, and Mr. Smelt replied, you brought him to me at 4.5, and I promised to look after him. I will reiterate that promise. I will look after him at the cricket, but he's certainly capable of playing at our level. But go back 12 months, we got to the school's final, and it was an inclement week. We were due to play the quarter-final, and it rained most of the week. We ended up playing the quarter-final on the Thursday evening, and I managed to score 35 not out of 70 odd to win the game and took 6 wickets. And then in the semi-final, we played on the Friday night, and again, I was fortunate. I got another 30 odd, and we got to the final on the Saturday. And at that stage, it was the first day of the school holidays. So consequently, having finished school on the Friday, a lot of boys' parents had booked holidays and decided to go. So we lost our 2 opening batsmen and our 2 opening bowlers. So when we got to the final, Mr. Fletcher said to me, he said, Geoff, he said, you're going to open the bowling today. I said, oh, does that mean instead of bowling my off spinners, I have to run up and bowl it as quick as I can? No, he said, you just bowl your off spinners. And being short of as we were, I did open the bowling, and the figures were actually 16.1 overs, 2 maidens, 26 runs, and all 10 wickets. And when I came off, obviously fairly jubilant and happy, and Dad came on to me and he says, come and see your mum. And he says, do you realise what the lad's done? And Mum says, well, there's a lot of fuss. So he says, he's taken all 10 wickets. That means he's bowled everybody out. She said, well, what about number 11? As Mum sat there with her knit one, pearl one, knitting needles going like mad. But I was the smartest lad there, with sort of pressed trousers and clean shirts, and that was Mum's pride and joy. But I then went on to get 36 not out of the 55 required, and we won by 5 wickets.
How did the opposition react to this young whippersnapper taking all the wickets basically and winning the game for his team?
Well, they had a master called Mr. Grady, and I came across him later when he was part of the school teachers who looked after Leeds schools cricket under 15s, and he recalled that day very much, and he just said, we thought we got a great chance when we knew that the 2 opening batters weren't there and the opening bowlers weren't. They were limited on who they could pick, and we were very confident that we could do it. And then he said, you stepped in early by opening the bowling and taking a wicket in the first over, and suddenly we were on the back foot all the way through.
Did you know from that point onwards, Geoff, that you would have a very good chance of representing the county, or did you still think, well, it's very early days and I've had a good day today? What were your thoughts around that time?
No, it was a dream, because we'd spent so much time. We played in the park. There was a regular crew from the school who met there. Our parents took it in turns to come and bring us out of the park at 7:30 and 7:45 if we got an extension, and they walked us home. But those lads were good lads. We played and practiced, but we just lived the dream. And I remember many hours in the park where I used to run a long way and let it go and drag my feet. And Mum and Dad used to give me grief for my sandals starting wearing on a drag toe cap because I was Fred Trueman. And I said, well, you better buy me a steel toe cap. He's got one, and this went through. But it was all dreams at that stage. And, we hoped. My dad had an opportunity to join Arsenal in his younger days, but he didn't. But he didn't want me to go through life saying if. And I played football at a very reasonable level, and we ended up, the boys were taken down to Ellen Road, to Leeds United, and we signed up there as their juniors, or with their juniors. And it was at that stage that the eyes went, and it was quite amazing because I wanted to play football. Yeah, I wanted to play cricket. And it was an era where likes of Chris Balderston played, they played cricket in the summer and football in the winter. And the seasons didn't lap over, certainly as much as they do as of today. But it was a time, and Dad had been to the opticians only a fortnight earlier. And I mocked him a little by saying, come on, read the bottom line. And I was reading the bottom line for him. And a fortnight later, I was in the same chair and I couldn't read the board. And it went that quickly and ended up with glass bottoms, as we used to call them, glasses. And that immediately made the decision that football was to go, and you therefore could concentrate full time on cricket.
I want to ask you about that in a moment, but just going back to you playing cricket with your mates in the park, was it obvious then that you were by far the best player among your friends? Because I've played with guys who've gone on to play football at a professional level, and there was no doubt that they were streaks ahead of those people that didn't.
We used to take it in turns to play a game over a week, and took it in turns for captains, and then you'd stand apart at 10 yards and then you put one foot to the next and work your way in, and finally whoever got the one at the top was captain and had first choice, and the other one then got the second choice, and I found myself fairly often being the first choice of any of the captains that wanted, which I took as a compliment, but not as an answer that said you are the best.
Now, when you played for Yorkshire, you've alluded to this to a certain extent. You wore glasses at first, and then you graduated to contact lenses. It's hard to imagine these days a top-class sports person wearing glasses, isn't it? Because everybody wears contact lenses nowadays.
That's right. But if you recall, a certain Geoffrey Boycott played in rimless glasses, and it was in fact Geoff who, through Kelvin lenses, started trying out contact lenses for sport. And of course, in rugby league, and one or two friends that I had in football and rugby, they started wearing them. And the first lenses were probably, I nearly said the size of a shilling, but that was the era of those days. They were big lenses, and you could wear these for so long. But then, obviously, you became sore. And being cricket, you needed something that you could wear, for at least 10 hours. Whereas football, you could put them in and play an hour and a half and 2 hours, and then you were all right. But Geoff did a lot of research with Kelvin. He started wearing these lenses. And then when I'd played in them for a few years, he said to me, he says, why don't you try these contact lenses? And I said, well, I'll try. So I spent the next winter trying to wear these hard contact lenses. and I never got beyond 2-3 hours. The soreness was there, and it was just a hazard of the time. So I kept with the glasses, but then the following winter I tried again, and by this time they brought out soft lenses, and I was able to wear the soft lenses, but not the hard. And this was good for me, so I got into soft lenses, and basically never looked back from there.
You mentioned some names there that many people will remember, whether they're fans of Yorkshire cricket or not. Of course, you've mentioned Geoff Boycott. And am I right in saying that when Ray Illingworth left Yorkshire, I think it was in '69, to go to Leicestershire, that was when you got your big break for the county?
It was getting to a point where I played in '66, and then I started getting invites. Illy was playing with England, and I was working full time at that particular time. And you go into the boss, and Illy's being picked on, announced on the Sunday, and you go in Monday morning, and you'd say, "Could I have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday off?" But if Mr. Illing was picked for the test team, I would need the following Monday and Tuesday as well, and you would play 2 3-day games. If he was 12 man, he'd come back for the Saturday, Monday, Tuesday, and you could come back to work. So this worked for, excuse me, this worked for a while, quite a while. I took what holidays I had, and they were very helpful to me initially. But then as time progressed, 68, I actually topped the national averages, and had 40 wickets at not many, whereas Illy had 90, maybe 80, 90 wickets. I don't know the exact answer. But we were beginning to play, both of us together. Illy more as the all-rounder. And Yorkshire were, or always appeared to have, 2 opening bowlers, an all-rounder and 2 spinners. And Don Wilson and Raymond were the 2 spinners for Yorkshire. But then they started introducing me, and Illy was batting 6, and it used to work very well. And when he went to Leicester, Jack Birkinshaw and I have had many a laugh that if it was a good pitch, come and have a bowl, Geoff. But if it was turning, Illy was suddenly loosening up, and I'll have a bowl now. But Illy was a master tactician, and there's no ifs and buts about that. He was very, very clever. But by playing in the same team as him, then I learned an awful lot. But of course, it came to the point, really, you've topped the national averages, you're playing in front of crowds, you go back to the second team on a regular basis when, there's 2 men on his dog sort of thing. And you just wanted to be in this life. And at that time, I remember I had a word with Freddie Millett, who was captain of Cheshire, but a very, very well-respected guy in the cricketing terms at Lord's and indeed with Cheshire. But Fred and I went for a meal that night in our first fixture, and I just said, I'm faced with the prospect of thinking of leaving Yorkshire. And I says, it's something that will break me in half, but I want to play. And he listened to me and he talked to me. And it was agreed at the end of that particular dinner that we would leave it until the end of the season, i.e. a second 11 fixture at Bridlington between Yorkshire and Cheshire, which was the last second team game of the season. And we would have dinner that evening, that first night, and we would renew the conversation to see how the season had gone, etc. And it was quite funny because I was bowling actually at Freddie Millett, and a great friend of mine, Jim Wood, who was the local headmaster, and he was a big cricketer at Bridlington, chairman and everything else involved, came running on between overs which was, hang on, is this a riot? No, it's Jim running on at the best as quick as he can. He just shouts, "Illy's gone, you're in." And I said, "What?" He says, "He's gone." And Freddie Millett just turned to me and he says, "Do I presume dinner's off tonight?" Which I thought was a lovely way of putting it, because he'd shared it and kept it quiet. But we did go for dinner. So it left me with the task of filling a master's boots. And I found it a bit hard in 69. And then gradually 70 was a good year, got my cap, and then we progressed forward.
You mentioned there some big names that people of my age and maybe even younger will remember only too well. You mentioned Geoffrey Boycott and Fred Trueman. Now, to me, both of those characters always seem to be very, I'm trying to think of the word, austere. People that you would be scared of, maybe respectful of. Were they like that in reality, or am I right to think that?
They were two extremely different people, totally. Boyks was obsessed with succeeding. He knew, he'd come out with a number and he'd know what his average was at that stage. And he wanted to progress. I got fairly close to Geoffrey when we were playing. Others found it difficult, but at the end of the day, he was a mighty fine player. Perhaps you looked at it and you saw certain innings. I remember one game at Middlesbrough, and we were playing Glamorgan on the flattest wicket I think I'd ever seen. The groundsman, Keith Boyce, who left Middlesbrough to come to Headingley for a good number of years, Keith had prepared this pitch for the end of August, and we got there in a dry summer, and the square itself was an actual picture of deep green with one white wicket that you could hardly see any foot marks from previous games with the Middlesbrough Cricket Club there and everything else. He'd done an absolute marvellous job, and his daughter had actually sat on the roller through the winter in several layers of clothes with a book at her knee, driving the big roller round and round and round the outfield, which used to be a rugby ground. And this outfield was absolutely pristine. It was a billiard top. And the rough scores were 300 each. Glamorgan batted first, we batted second, they batted third and declared. And then Boyce came in the dressing room and said, "Who wants a net?" So I said, "What are you on about?" So, "Well, it's a ridiculous declaration." "Well, we can give this." And the situation, it was the end of August. We were second in the championship at that time. And Glamorgan were down near the bottom, but that was beside the point. It was the fact that if we'd have got a win out of it, then we'd have stayed up there with only a few games to go to who actually won the championship. And we started saying, we've got to give it a go. Well, it's a ridiculous declaration, and one or two. So John Hampshire said, "I'll come in with you, Boyks, and I'll give it a go. You just play as normal." And Jimmy Love said, "Well, I'll give it a go." David Bairstow says, I'll have a go. And so it was finally decided we'd go in. And so we said to Boyks, "Right, the best thing to do is you come in at 70 not out at tea time and leave us a situation where we need about 120, 130 with and those rules those days were 20 minutes bowling after tea. Then you went into a final 20 overs. And we said, if you can get us to there, and we need 130, 120 in the last 20 overs, we can all give it a go." So Boyks got to this 70 not out with about 10 minutes to go to tea, and he blocked it and came in at 70 for not out and said, "Now what do I do?" And we just said, "Get on with it." And he scored a big 100. and we won that game by 7 wickets. And the way he played that day was absolutely superb. And a lot of people would say, you know, if you want your life depending on something, then get Boyks to bat for you. He was that sort of player. He was sacked from the England team for scoring a slow 240. You know, but the answer was he was a different person, but had such talent and such ability. But I think he was worried at the fact of, you know, the players around him weren't quite as good as him, and he was a bit concerned if he got out, then the others would struggle. But
was he like that off the pitch as well?
Even now, he goes on radio and he talks sense. He talks about the game. He knows the game, and he talks well about the game. But some people find him a difficult person to have conversation with. He's his own man, shall we leave it that way? Whereas Fred, dear old Fred, bless him, when I got the telegram, which was the way of finding out in those days, Yorkshire didn't spend a lot of money, and the telegram just read, "Report Bradford tomorrow, Nash." And that was the invite to go play your first game for Yorkshire. So I'd lost my mum by this time, and Dad came. I rang him quickly and to find, you know, what had happened, and his pal at work said, he's not here, Geoff. So I said, what do you mean he's not here? So he said, well, he's gone home early. I says, is he poorly? He says, no, he's all right. He's all right, don't worry. So I said, oh, right. And we had a thing in those days, whoever went to the laundrette, the other one did the ironing. And typical Yorkshire, I was the last to find out that I was going to play. The next day, Dad had already heard and had come home. He'd been to the laundrette and he was already doing the ironing. And the suit was pressed. The one and only suit I had was pressed. And I set off the next morning, as my late mum would have liked, in pristine condition, stripes, trousers absolutely creased to the ultimate, and a clean white shirt. And I walked through the gates at Park Avenue, and it was like going to the footballers' Wembley. And I got myself undressed in the corner out the way. It was an hour and a half before the start, before anybody had come. And I made my way out to the middle, and I looked at the pitch, and I'd never seen a wicket like this before. There was always, in second team cricket, there was always a bit of grass in it or a little bit of give in the turf. This was concrete. It was white. It was fabulous. And I'd never seen anything like it. I chatted to the groundsman. He wished me well. And then I had my first meeting with the press as I made my way back, and they wished me well. And classics there, I worked at the time for Wiggins Teep, which was a well-known paper merchant. And the press, bless them, this Wiggins Teep, they translated as a well-known Leeds tea firm, which went down exceptionally well with the boss. But, however, I'd done my first interview and I made my way back to the dressing room. And when I got to that little area where you come off the stairs and you've a little 4-yard walk to the door, I suddenly realised that I was joining a Yorkshire team of 11 international players. And my head was bowed, and I opened the door, and there was a big table in the dressing room, and under the table was this suit that had been pressed, that was curled up in a ball with shirts round it and socks and trousers. I looked across at my corner, and sat in it was a broad-shouldered gentleman with a black mane. And he said, "I sees that peg up there, lad." He said, "It's been mine," he said, "for the last 15 years. And if I think I'm changing for thee, there's another thing coming." "Are them under there thine?" I said, "They are, Mr. Trueman." "Well, pick them up," he said, "and you can borrow Raymond's peg for this match." And very, very nervously, I picked these up and I put them on with the help of Phil Sharp, and put on the peg. And when I turned round, Fred was there, and his arms were wide open, his big chest. He says, "Come and give me a hug, son," he said. There's one of us now. And the Uncle Fred will look after you. And he did for life.
I just want to move on, Geoff, to your England career, because you made your debut in Pakistan, and your debut is very famous for the hat-trick that you nearly took. Could you just talk us through briefly what happened?
It was a protracted innings. They were still in their first innings on the third morning of the Test match. Madassa got the slowest ever Test 100, and the pitch was absolutely slow, low, and doing absolutely nothing. And scoring was not easy, but you were never going to get out. And if you sort of tried to attack them, they'd hit you over the top. If you defended, then they just blocked you out, and it was difficult. And then finally, I got a wicket, and Safraz came in, next batsman, and he tried to hit me into India from Pakistan and missed. Unfortunately, it was a straight delivery, and it brought Iqbal in to face the hat-trick ball. And this one, I thought, well, he won't want to be involved in a hat-trick. You might have a little bit more license. He's just going to look to play it safely, I thought. Anyway, I looped it a bit higher, and it straightened. I wouldn't say it turned, but it sort of held its own. And Icky played half forward and then went back, and he got an outside edge, and Mike Brearley dived to his left and took the catch. Now, Mike was one of 6 people round the batter for the hat-trick delivery. And everybody jumped up in glee, great, that's it. Little Icky, bless him, looked down the pitch, just nodded and said, well bowled, Geoff, and off he went. And I turned around, the umpire's just there. He says, I've never experienced a hat-trick before, well bowled, shook my hand and everything. And then Brears came up with the idea that he'd not taken the catch cleanly. And everybody was sort of, but Brears, you did. We were there, we saw it. And no, he says, I'm not convinced. And finally, he made the statement that for the best interests of the series, I'm going to bring him back. So the bringing of him back obviously took the hat-trick away from me. It saved me the embarrassment of a Yorkshireman having to buy a round of drinks. But at the end of the day, I think I'd have been well worth paying those drinks. But a lot of people were convinced it was out, but Brears, bless him, he stuck by his principles, and I admire that. And as I say, we went back in time when Sonny Gavaskar, who adopted my friendship and I did his during our tour of India the year previous, came over to play for Somerset, and we were at Weston-super-Mare, and I got one to turn to him, and he nicked it round the corner, and John Hampshire made the catch. And we all looked. Sonny looked, waited, then walked. We looked at the square leg umpire. He nodded. The umpire at my end then gave him out. But Hamps came to me and he said, Geoff, he said, I've not caught it properly. I am convinced. So I said, well, you've got to do the right thing then. So we brought Sonny back, and he apologised and said, thank you for your sportsmanship. I think he went from 23 to 138, but that was no way of saying thank you. He should have gone earlier. But anyway, it didn't matter. Hamps was happy. He couldn't guarantee that he'd taken it, and he wasn't happy that he'd taken it. So something like that, he knew, and nobody else was there could say to Hamps it was clean and it was right. People went on instinct rather than, and he did what was right. And Brearley, in his own words, Mike Brearley, he did what he thought was right.
Could I just ask you very briefly in relation to the Mike Brearley incident then, have we established subsequently whether the ball carried, or is it still one of those things that will remain forever indeterminate?
It's still a story that will go on. I don't think the television in those days were of the situation where, you know, you got the dissection that you get of today sort of thing. And it was just one of those things that went by and you moved on.
There's so much we could talk about in relation to your career, but I suspect we'd be here all day. There's a lot been going on in Yorkshire, which I also don't want to talk about, particularly the off-the-field stuff, because, you know, that's been documented elsewhere. But I do have to ask you about Yorkshire's prospects for this forthcoming season. I know last season didn't go particularly very well. You're obviously a keen observer of Yorkshire cricket. How well do you think they'll do this season?
I'm that keen an observer. I'm currently president, but I relinquished that role at the AGM this year. And it was very sad that we played as we did last year. If I just say briefly, it wasn't a happy camp. We've lost several players who I wished were still here. Equally, we didn't perform to the level that I know Yorkshire's capable of playing at. But without doubt, there is a lot going on, and it's not for me to get involved with that. But it's had its effect throughout the playing, the administration, everybody at the club. And we've got to pick ourselves up as a unit. I've been involved with Yorkshire cricket for 61 years now. And it's one of the low points, sadly. But desperately, I hope that the lads can get together, be one unit, play to their capabilities, to the best of their abilities, and hopefully the second division, I do feel there's a difference between the two in terms of standard, and I would like to think that providing nothing happens ECB-wise, that we're up there challenging for promotion at the end of this year.
Do all the things that have been happening off the pitch have an effect on the pitch, do you think? Do you think players are at least conscious of it?
Major impact. And they are conscious of what's going on. They'll say, we like to keep ourselves to ourselves in the dressing room, but, you know, every game is there, every spectator has an opinion. You can't go to a game and not hear it. And the lads are in the focal point, and I feel for them dramatically. The
county's turned a corner, though, hasn't it now, Geoff?
Well, I think there's some decisions to be made that are very important. We've just got a new chief exec. We've hopefully a new chairman coming in very shortly. It's a new team, shall we say, of in the exec. And a lot of people, this is the sad part, there's a lot of good people, both in the administrative side of it and the playing side, who have left Yorkshire. And they've left, sadly, for the wrong reasons, but they've had to leave in their own mind. It's affected a lot of people in a lot of ways. And they see salvation elsewhere, as it were. But it's been disappointing, but we've got to be positive and produce our best for next year.
Your love of Yorkshire cricket shines through in the way that you speak there, Geoff, without doubt. Could we talk, however, about you now? Because you were telling us before that your optician kind of gave you almost like a blueprint, a roadmap of how your vision would develop and your loss of vision would progress. When you heard that news, what were your thoughts?
For a start, when you're a consultant that just turns around, well, you're going blind. That was the worst news that I got, and I was completely numb as I left Harrogate, his rooms in Harrogate, to drive home, and I could only get halfway, and I stopped off at some friends, and evidently I knocked on the door, and the door was opened, and I just stood there and said, I'm going blind. And there was just silence, and the shock that was there for them was equally to me, but they got some strong tea down me and what have you, and I managed to get home. But it was the recovery started with my optician coming over to see me and saying it's mild. And then those few years later, when my doctor played a big part in getting me to meet Bruce Noble. And Bruce, as I said, was superb. He talked basic English to me. He told me what it was about. He drew little sketches, and he mapped out the life. But I knew that I'd go through that for quite a number of years with him close to me. And he was able to relate to me. I mean, it was lovely. The first time we ever met, he said, there's several things that aren't right here. I'm a Southerner. I went to public school. I this, I that, but I do like cricket. And that broke the ice, as it were. And this guy I've a lot of admiration for.
I've been visually impaired all my life. I was born totally blind and then had some operations that gave me a little bit of sight. I'm still obviously very visually impaired. But so it's hard for me to understand the impact that kind of thing would have on somebody like you who'd been fully sighted. It's interesting to hear what you've got to say there. When did you start having to make changes to your life? Because when we were talking earlier, you talked about having to stop driving, for instance. What changes did you have to make?
Well, I got to 50 when it was time to hand the car in, as it were, which immediately, well, within months, cost me my job. I was a director, branch manager. A lot of the time was on the road, 30,000 mile a year job, seeing customers, meetings, this, that, and the other, and everything. Well, have you ever tried walking around Keighley with a briefcase in your hand and your samples, and it's pouring down with rain, and you've come in on the train and you walk from one printer to another printer, and you're thinking, what am I doing here? And you're very much on your own. And to adjust to that, what kept me going was effectively my retention all the time was the interest in Yorkshire. And I ended up going back to Yorkshire, working there for quite a while. I was on the board initially. I brought together the board in 2002. Effectively, I'd read minutes that I found hard, and there was a financial crisis, as it were. And I brought a pal in who brought a lot of money in. And Colin Graves, who at that stage owned Cost Cutter, he'd started up Cost Cutter and made tremendous inroads with his company. And he came and joined us. He was a big cricket fan, and financially he got us out of the mire. So there was a big part to play there. And suddenly the life took off again, but it was Yorkshire cricket. And if it hasn't come over, my wife says to me, basically, if you're ever down, go find somebody to talk to, because that's my life. I love talking to people. I love sharing things with people. And very much I was able to do that. And at Yorkshire Cricket, you can do that.
Could I ask you about the practical effects of your visual impairment? You've talked about not being able to drive. What about things like reading, getting out and about, and activities like that? Were they still possible for you?
Reading's getting very difficult now. I get very frustrated. I've got contact lenses in, I wear reading glasses, and I have a magnifying glass. And it doesn't always, it's not always there, so you become frustrated.
Have you tried technology like Zoom text or any of the speech-based?
No, I'm not at that. Well, I haven't been at that stage, should I say, but I think that is where I'm at this stage, that I have a lot of difficulty balancing things out. One of the major problems with RPs is the light, and light to dark and dark to light cause real problems. And the best thing I can describe it to people is when they go to the cinema. They go inside the cinema and they suddenly say, "Oh, it's dark. Where's the seats? Oh, there they are." Well, by the time I've adjusted to that light, the film's nearly finished. But basically, when I come out from a dark area into the light, it's just a white cloud, and I have to wait until I adjust. And there's a time and so when you're in a room where you've shadow and darkness to one side, and when you look to speak to somebody at the other, and behind them is the sunlight and everything else, suddenly you've lost them, you've lost everything. So you get very frustrated.
You've talked about there the frustration, Geoff. I mean, more generally, what was the psychological impact on you of realising that your sight would get progressively worse?
You wonder for how long will it, I mean, I've been told that probably I will still have some vision of some sort during my life. You just worry that will that run out and will you go blind, and you don't want that to happen. Equally, I rely heavily on my guide dog. I get out, I go have coffees around Guiseley, and people are brilliant. Hi Geoff, go find a seat, we'll bring it across. And they look after you, and it's ever so good.
Tell me about the guide dog, Geoff.
He's brilliant. He's the third one I've got, who is quite superb. You can't see, he's been asleep in my study whilst you and I have been talking, and now he's with his sort of mouth on my thigh and he's looking at me, and it's brilliant. He's just part and parcel of me.
How independent are you able to be now, Geoff? You talked about going for coffee. Are you able to get out and about around Guiseley and Leeds quite happily, quite independently?
I won't say I'm happy going around Leeds or Bradford or the big centres, but you have one set up, which I went to the hospital, St James's, for some eye treatment, and I ended up seeing 3 different people, 3 different lots of drops. And when I came out, I'd gone in at 2:45 and I came out about 5:15, 5:50, and it was just a cloud. I couldn't see anything. And for the first time, I felt I'm on my own here. And the consultant said, "Are you all right for getting home?" And I said, "Yeah, I've got my friend with me." And I'd said to Lester, I says, "It's you and me, pal, but I can't see. You've got to get me home." And he just set off walking at half pace. And he walked me through St James's, out to the crossing that we use. And he took me, and I said, "Find the box." And he went to where you press the button and put the nose up and everything else. We crossed, we got on a bus into Leeds. I got on the wrong bus because I couldn't read the number, but they all go into Leeds, but I was at the wrong end of Leeds.
I know.
So we walk across, in the middle of rush hour, and this dog just walks, stops, and somebody goes rush in front of you, and then he sets off again, and then stops, and whoosh, somebody else comes in front. And he walked across Leeds and he found the station. And we went through the disabled gates at the station, and he turned right and he took me onto platform 3. And we just sat there, and the train arrived and the guard got out and he said, "Are we looking for the Ilkley train?" And I said, "We are." He says, "Where are you off?" I says, "Guys." He said, "Well, this is it." And he got me to the station. We got on the train with the help of the guard. We got off in Guiseley, and he just sat down. And the guard says, "I'm waiting, I'm watching this." He says, "I'm intrigued." I says, "I bet it's busy." And there's still just a cloud in front of me, whiteness. And he said, "It is fairly busy, yeah." I said, "Oh, most of them have gone now," because he stood up. And he wanted the next instruction. I said, "Can you take me home now, pal?" And we set off. And just as I was getting home, I was starting to see the outline of the house and the gate. And half an hour later, I'd got what vision I had back. But that's what a guide dog does for you.
Could I just ask you a couple of final things then, Geoff?
Yeah.
You wore glasses when you played cricket and then contact lenses, but was visual impairment anything you'd thought about as a young man?
Not really. I thought, you look round you. I mean, my dad wore glasses most of his life. Mum wore glasses for reading. You look round at everybody in the office, and there's people who come in every day in glasses, and you just think, well, I'll be like that, not a problem.
And what would you say you've learnt about yourself since your sight started to go? Is there anything that you kind of look at and think, well, I didn't know that about myself?
I look at the point that I've been very lucky in life, that I've got some wonderful memories. More importantly, I've made through sport a lot of friends that I'm still in contact with today. I've had, dare I say, a good life, as they say. But at the end of it all, I try to be normal. I try to just join in where I can, do what I can where I can. But at the end of the day, there's always something that stops you because, oops, I can't do that.
And do your old mates from Yorkshire and in sport just kind of treat you the same, sort of take the mick and all that sort of stuff?
I get more grief now than they ever did. He's only come with his dog because he wouldn't know how to get here. He'd blame it on the dog if he's late. You get all sorts thrown at you, but every one of them, do you want some help, Geoff? Are you all right? And once you say I'm all right, they leave you alone and you get on with it. And if I say, can I have a shoulder? And I put a hand on somebody's shoulder, they'll guard me through.
Geoff Cope there, and I'd like to thank Geoff very much indeed for his time and for being so open. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Okay, so which vow track have I chosen? Well, it's one called My Swan Song. Now, I should point out that this isn't my swan song where podcasts are concerned. I haven't done quite as many as I would have done in the past, but that's because I've been rather busy. So watch this space, there will be more. In the meantime, this is My Swan Song by The Vow.
Well, me, I don't know where the years go, stooping so low, away. I waited so long for my swan song, such a sweet song to play. No one's telling me how I ought to be. I am alright. Yes, I'm alright. I take a skydive on the downslide. That's the dark side of grey. But it's a show